Okay, the recording is on. Just kind of a little bit of housekeeping stuff, for lack of a better term. I think I've got everybody marked present. No, I don't have Caitlin and I don't have Evelyn, okay? I mean, Ethel.
Sorry, Dr. Benson, I thought you knew I was on.
I've got you, Evelyn. I meant Ethel. Yes.
I'm here.
Okay.
How you doing?
Good, good. I did open the test back up for a few people who had said that they needed a little more time, and a couple of people who I knew were not going to be able to take it at that time due to illness or some other emergency in the family. But some of you were saying that you didn't have enough time, but you did a pretty good job on that test. I was really pleased with those grades, and I finally got it all graded. You know, essays take a long time to read, so it took me until Thursday, I think, to finish all of them. So all of them should be graded unless you were in the group that I allowed to go back into it. I haven't looked at those yet. Okay, so I wanted to mention that. I have graded for this week. I've graded your management plan and your grading beliefs. Your management plans were just really interesting because they covered the gamut of so many different things. It would be nice if we could give everybody access to all the different things that people wrote in their management plans. Most of you certainly talked about the procedures that you were going to establish for all kinds of places. Some of you went into far more depth than others, particularly those of you who already have classrooms. Your responses were probably in much more detail than some of the students who are still traditional students. But that's okay. This is where we're learning and putting it all together. And some of you have already been out there practicing and putting it together. There were a couple of things that I noticed that as I was reading those management plans. I think it was someone had written, you know, you want to keep your kids engaged and active. And Sharita had a comment on hers that her fifth rule was keep your dear teacher happy. And I just thought, well, that's an interesting rule to have. A couple of you talked about the PBIS system that's in place in school. And I wondered if somebody who did that, and I didn't jot down a name, I think it was Brandy who mentioned PBIS. That was one of them who mentioned it. There were a couple. I did. Can you tell us a little bit, Brandy, about how that works?
For like individuals, they get treasure box at the end of the week, but as a whole class, they earn Cougar Paws. And if the whole class fills up their sheet for the month, the class gets either a Wii party or ice cream or a movie. They just try to reinforce, you know, the positive behaviors with positive, fun things to do.
So it is a positive reinforcement kind of model, right?
Yeah.
Now, what did you say? Did you say that they got a weed party?
We, WII.
I was going to say, I didn't know what you all were teaching there.
No.
Okay.
No, they can play the like Dance Dance Revolution.
I just wanted to clarify that. I didn't want anybody to go out of here and say,
sorry.
Oh, this teacher talked about they were having a weed party as a part of
Sorry, I've been sick, so you probably can't understand half the words that come out of me.
No, you're doing fine. Yeah, I was going to ask you. Okay. And I think it was Sinetria who talked about or she did a contract with parents. She sent home the the contract with parents as a part of her management plan. So just some interesting different ideas that you can hopefully glean from each other a little bit. As I said, I wish it would be, I could have put that as a forum so everybody could have read everybody else's, but anyway. All right, then I did look at the grading essay. I have not looked at the, or the grading belief rather. I have not looked at the articles that you had found on grading, but many of you incorporated your ideas from your article in your grading belief. And a couple of things that I noticed, I think it was Jonathan Riggs who had in his, and he is an ag teacher in, I believe, the kind of the western part of the state, or at least at Piedmont. I can't remember exactly where Jonathan is right quick. But he talked about doing, and he's already teaching as lateral entry. So he talked about doing partial credit as one of the strong suits of the discipline plan that he's worked, or the management plan that he's worked out. So I thought that was another topic that some of you might want to might be interested in. And I think it was Stephen is going to do health and PE, and he had gone to the national standards put out by a professional organization for health and PE professionals, and looked at those national standards. And Stephen, you want to? I was interested in your comment that those standards did not necessarily say that kids had to be proficient. Can you comment on that? Did I read that incorrectly?
I kind of have like a bigger picture idea when it comes to developing my students to kind of be just better human beings that are able to move, that are able to understand that life is not going to be about, it's a little bit bigger picture. It's like life is going to be best served when you're using exercise and proper nutrition as medicine rather than falling victim of big pharma. And then also just being kind to other people and being able to work with other people, because there's a very common quote that says uncoachable athletes become unemployable adults, and something along that line, where you just have to, in a physical setting where people are moving and you test the body, their true character comes out, and you'll be able to help them work through issues. And none of the standards actually address really any of that. And you're going to be able to see that day in and day out as you see your students in the actual activities, rather than on a piece of paper or sitting at a desk.
Yeah. Okay. Any other comment about the items that you were talking about here? Anybody else want to share an idea that you had that I haven't mentioned that you think is particularly good?
Dr. Benson, it's David Moore.
Yes.
I wasn't sure if the one that I read was good or not. I did like it in some ways, but what it basically was it was for literacy and writing papers and things of that nature. And they said basically that the teachers were tired of grading something for the students to turn around within 5 seconds and just stuff it in their desk and, oh, thanks for the grade. So what they started doing was they implemented something along the lines of your rough draft is graded. Your second draft is not graded. It's just giving you, whatever you need to keep building upon your lesson. But they hold the initial writing more on the grading scale than the final and second, because they believe that the children should be writing, older students, but they should be writing at the higher level the first time, not just turning something in for a basic grade.
Yeah, I read that. I thought that was interesting. And I have read that article before, or read a student had done that had read that article before and had written it up. It's kind of an interesting concept that grading that first draft. I'm not sure I agree with that necessarily, but I understand their point of view, because second and third chances mean that you don't have to put your whole effort into the first chance.
Now, I would like to add on to that, David Moore and Dr. Benson. I was actually a student in a system that our English professors back in high school were actually implementing a system like that.
Oh.
It was standard that they give us an opportunity for a first draft, and that was weighed more for the final for that particular assignment, and then you were given opportunities to improve upon critiques or peer evaluation or the students or the teacher's instructions, and by understanding not only what the teacher wants, but being able to reflect on your own work several times really helped my learning brain kind of develop from a particularly average or below average writer or even understander of content to develop I feel onto that next level.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
I think giving students second and third opportunities to kind of improve their work, but not maybe give it as an additional grade, more of like an opportunity to just improve and improve, kind of actually helps the students really grasp what you're looking for.
Because what we're trying to do in managing behavior and in really any of the academic endeavors is to get kids to own their own work, whether it's their behavior or their work. So yeah, different ways of going about it. I was really interested in some of the comments that you were making in your grading belief idea. A number of you commented on some things that you read in our textbook. Others of you talked about personal experiences that you'd had or experiences that you'd had with a child. I think it was Jennifer. Jennifer, didn't you wrote about experience with your daughter? Can you share a little bit with that? Do you mind?
Yes, I was saying that when you are strictly grading by standardization, that yes, it's a good like foundation or blueprint for you to go by so that all children are like on a level playing field. But I don't believe that is that it is a foolproof method for showing what a child knows and understands, because I gave the example of my daughter who is 11 and she's in 5th grade, and she is very smart and is a straight A student, but when it comes to taking tests, sometimes she has test anxiety, and which has resulted in her making lower grades on her tests. And it's not that she doesn't understand the information or the content or the skill. It's just she has trouble getting it down on paper. Or they started this year actually testing students on computer that has a timer on it. And when she sees that timer start and is watching the timer tick down, it freaks her out. And so I gave an example, like to maybe give children like a chance to do like an extra credit assignment where they can earn points doing an assignment that is better related to the way that they learn.
Yeah, Jonathan Riggs in his grading belief, and he's already teaching his lateral entry, and he's teaching high school ag. So he talked about the importance of making sure that the kids have success. And so that all kind of blends into, and he said that he gave lots of extra credit and really got criticized by other people on the faculty for giving too much extra credit. But his point was he was trying to help kids master the material and also to feel successful at what they were trying to accomplish. It's just interesting how you think about that. You know, grading is such a process that is so difficult for so many teachers, and yet we don't give, I don't feel, that we don't give enough thought about how we grade and why we grade. Somebody, and I don't remember this one, who it was, it may have been Haley, wrote about the whole idea of the 100 or the 0. If you don't turn in your assignment, you get a 0. And then what that does, that 1 0, even if you have 300s and a 0, your average is going to be what, 75? So is that 75 grade indicative of your effort over the whole level or the whole span of the course? So, there are all things to think about. It's not just so cut and dried when you're thinking about grading. Now, those of you who are early childhood, you made the point very quickly that, in early childhood education, we really are not assigning grade level grades except one person. Sharita, was that you or was it Evelyn?
Yes, it's me.
And you all grade by by letter?
Yeah, well, we do the 10-point grading system
And
in kindergarten.
Parents okay with that?
Yes, I guess. I don't know. It's a school-wide. It's just what we do at our charter school.
Is there a rationale for that?
Not that I know of. I just kind of do what I'm told. No, honestly, I don't know.
Has anybody investigated the current beliefs about early childhood education and giving those kinds of letter grades to early childhood people?
My youngest daughter is in 1st grade, and they do grading like proficient, improving, needs improvement, satisfactory, that type of.
Yeah, well, I can live with that a little bit.
I've never heard of like ABC, like a letter, like a scale, a 10-point scale for that early of an age.
Well, I don't think most of the literature would back that up. I think most of the literature says that kids that young are probably a little bit too, and how finite are our assessments? How many of us are good enough at making tests? Which kind of brings me to the next point. Making tests. How, it takes people, and they call them psychometricians, who develop particularly these standardized tests that we use. And we still talk about the cultural bias in those tests and the problems with those tests. So how many of us are skilled enough at test making that we can say that this is strictly a 72 paper and this one is a 79 paper? That's putting some onus on us that says we are that gifted, we are that talented at making those kinds of tests. I hope that as you were writing your test items, talk to me before I say anything. Talk to me about what you experienced as you were working on those test items. How did you feel about that assignment? Other than it was crappy, you don't have to tell me that. But how did you feel? Was it an easy assignment? Let me go back there. Should be the first thing we talk about. Was it an easy assignment?
Dr. Benson, this is Adam.
Yes.
I'm sorry. I think I might have cut somebody off. Was there someone talking before me?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. It was kind of difficult. It started out easy, but as it went on, it was harder and harder to think of original things to cover in the questions.
Okay. Anybody else?
I had a hard time. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, Dr. Benson, this is Evelyn. It was a challenge, but I did use some of the same topics, like in the different areas, like the true and false or multiple choice, but just kind of reword it in a way where, so it's one of those tests where, like, if you really read one question, you might find that same answer in another.
Yeah, that's hard to avoid.
Yeah, so I kind of, did that in some way.
Okay, good. So anybody else?
I thought that was going to be my most difficult assignment, but actually once I got started, I'm kind of like with Evelyn, like I found myself using the same material throughout the test. But the only thing I really had a challenge with was, I think it's harder to come up with the false answers that you're like, when you're doing the multiple choice or the matching or whatever, like trying to come up with something that's not true. I think the true and false was probably my hardest area, because I was trying to come up with statements that weren't true.
Yeah.
I think I can agree with Jennifer on that as well. That's probably one of the toughest one I could do.
I believe that understanding what content we actually went over and that's required for the class, and separating that from maybe conversation. And we know we talked about some things, but it's not necessarily a topic on the test. Kind of filtering that out in my mind, I had to make sure, like, okay, did we go over this for purposes of learning it for the class, or was this just a talking topic that maybe we veered off on?
So knowing what you wanted and needed to test becomes an issue sometimes. And I think that's particularly true when you have taught. I always, and you all have seen some of that, because what we do with these Moodle shells is that if we taught that course last semester, we can import what we did last semester into this semester. Well, I import, and I usually try to go through and make changes, but always, invariably, I miss something. Or, if I want to take something out or add something. There was a problem with the posting those articles, grading. A number of you had written to me emails and said, I can't post my article summary in the grading assignment place. And I couldn't figure out why in the world you couldn't do that. And I went back into that thing 3 times to try to figure it out. And I finally saw it. It was one little form, one little figurine on the on my screen that had said that only people that I had assigned to a group could respond. Well, I had not assigned anybody to a group. I didn't intend for it to be that way. And as soon as I took that off, then you could respond then and post assignments. So, knowing what it is that you want to include, knowing what it is that's the things that are important, I think that becomes an issue for us. Any other comments about the grading belief, or anybody want to talk about your article that you read?
Dr. Benson, I do want to piggyback what Jennifer mentioned earlier regarding the grading belief. As an adult, I'm not a very good tester as well. And when she mentioned about her daughter looking at that timer, so when we was taking our tests, when we were timed for those 2 hours, looking at how much time I had left, does cause a little anxiety. So I can kind of relate to what Jennifer was pointing out earlier regarding the grading belief.
And that's a good point, Evelyn. Thank you. Because when I said that was just kind of an arbitrary. I didn't think it would take anybody that long. But this was the first time I had given this particular test. And so doing the essay type thing, because before I have had a whole section of the test that was multiple choice, all those kinds of questions, and then a few essays. And 2 hours was far too long for them. So I assumed that 2 hours, there you go, that 2 hours would be enough time. Most of you did a pretty good job anyway, in spite of that. But yeah, I think, there is such a thing, I believe firmly, as test anxiety. And so many people have it. I have known students who were just wonderful students, but when they had to take one of those standardized tests, they simply froze up. They just couldn't deal with it. Even when I was teaching, and this goes back to the whole idea that we were talking about earlier in the course about universal design for learning. The universal design for learning, with the 3 principles that it talks about, doing things in multiple ways. multiple ways of presenting the information, that's the presentation or representation, and multiple ways of assessing, that's the expression principle. So that's one of the things that, we should really be aware of, is that some kids may not do very well on taking that test, but they know the material. If we can think about other ways of assessing other than just that particular paper and pencil test, and then how we weight those items that we use for assessment in terms of the overall grade for the course. Now, many of you are early childhood, so you don't have so much of this to worry about, but particularly those of you who are doing the physical education and the ag, I think that's most everybody else, those are some things that you're going to have to be concerned with.
Yeah, one thing that really gets me, I guess, kind of nervous is at the beginning of any semester or any course that I enroll in, what the style of assessment does the teacher use? Because here we use conversation and literature as our means of studying, but if you're going to assess it maybe in a multiple choice, we haven't really gone over weeding out what's true from false, or what is similar but not exactly the same. So kind of you would have to prepare yourself for the kind of assessment.
And I think it was David who mentioned last time it would have been nice to have had a study guide. I know there are professors here who prepare a study guide, it's pretty explicit what's going to be on the test, because they don't believe that there should be surprises. I didn't do a study guide because I thought that most of the questions that were on that test were things that we have talked about in class pretty extensively. And it covered many of the topics that we've talked about in the course. Other comments about grading or the grading articles? Okay, I want us to take just a quick look again at in-task. That was one of the questions on the test, and really there was no right or wrong answer to that. That was kind of a giveaway question, because however you view what we're doing in terms of the in-task standards, as long as you knew what the in-task standards were, then you pretty much got full credit for that question. I wanted us to take a look at standards 6, 7, and 8, if I can, I'm too far down. Standard 6 talks about assessment, and we've talked about assessment quite almost all the way throughout this course because of the importance of assessment, both formative while you're teaching and to guide your next steps in teaching, and summative to kind of get an idea of, who understands what. So when you take a look at the items in the in-task standards, just take a quick glance down the performances real quickly. And what are words that you see there that we have kind of talked about in class, or that relate to things that we've talked about in class, or that relate to something that you would like us to talk about in class? Anybody see anything? What can you see there?
Differentiated learning.
Differentiated learning, right. Right here, engages learners in multiple ways of demonstrating knowledge and skill. That's what I just got through talking about. Yep.
Does that go with universal, the UDL?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Multiple and appropriate types of assessment data.
That's what I was getting ready to point out.
Yeah.
I was too. That's why I wanted to make sure it was the same.
You all just chime in. You don't have to.
Now 6G says that to use multiple appropriate types of assessment, but I found it, if anybody doesn't meet very frequently with their class, such as I'm as a special going to fall victim to that,
Yep.
We want to do kind of the exact opposite of what they suggest there, which is find an assessment that's going to be able to measure multiple domains of content or standards covered, because you're not going to get an hour plus every single day, 5 days a week. You might only get them for 40 minutes once a week.
Right. That's the problem that all the specials have. And I had a music teacher in my graduate class last semester, and that was something she talked about, you know, is learning the children, being able to even know what different kids need in terms of, and her situation was music, but particularly when in health and physical education, you're going to have that as an issue. Okay. Let's take a look down then at channel standard 7, channel 7, standard 7 planning. You know, we've talked about the importance of planning. We've talked about the development of the unit overview, which I'm going to come back to in just a few minutes when we look at assignments for this week. But look at the performances, because I'm focusing on performances today just simply in the interest of time. Please go back and read the essential knowledge and the critical dispositions. But look at the performances here. Anything there that you see that we've talked about or that we should talk about that we haven't?
7D, I mean, we pretty much just kind of covered that area. The teacher plans for instruction based on formative and summative assessment data. Right.
Prior learner knowledge. On your lesson plan, the very first thing, the focus and review, that's where you come back to that prior knowledge that they have and begin attaching this new content that you have for this lesson to that prior knowledge. That's why that whole first section is there on that lesson plan. How do you engage students with what they already know so they can learn this new thing? Now, that's going to be true most of the time. There may be a few instances where it's not. This may be just a totally new concept, but in most cases, you're going to be able to tie this new learning that you have for today to something that you did the day before or that you have done previously.
Dr. Benson, also 7E, I don't think we hit much on the collaboration with professionals.
Yeah.
Have we? I don't think.
We have not. And that is for any of you, and particularly for our ag students and anybody else who is traditional. That's one of the things that you will have to address when you take that PPAT assessment during your student teaching, is how do you identify the resources that are available to you in a school system or in your particular building or in your school district? What are the specialists that are available? Are there school social workers? Are there special education teachers? Are there psychologists? Are there speech therapists? Who's available to be able to augment what it is that needs to be done with children. In my graduate class, one of the things that I have them to do is to do a case study on 2 different children. And in that case study, that's one of the things they have to identify. What are the deficits that this child might have, and where can they, how can the educational program for that child be modified to better meet his needs? So they have to do that on 2 different children. And they find very often that they need to incorporate these kind of other people in that school, the others out there who have a vested interest in providing educational services to children. And that is on your lesson plan a little bit, but not really addressed to any extent that I can think of. Okay, other comments? All right, let's look at 8, instructional strategies. We've talked about the individual needs of learners and groups of learners. Monitoring, that's your assessment. Collaboration. We don't do, unfortunately, unlike the Japanese, we don't have much time in our daily schedules for many of our teachers to collaborate together. In some schools, the specials, the art, the music, the health and PE, are required to meet with grade levels. And in that grade level meeting that they are all a part of, they find out what are the objectives, or what are what is the content that's going to be covered this week or this month. And they're supposed to plan activities within their content discipline, whether it's music or art or health and PE, to supplement the activities that the classroom teacher are doing, and to reinforce the activities that those classroom teachers are doing. That works where it's carefully planned, and then sometimes it just devolves into a, I'm going to do my own thing kind of thing. The teacher provides multiple models and representations of concepts and skills. UDL, multiple representations. Higher order thinking and higher order questioning skills, and metacognitive processes. In my graduate class, we talk about metacognition, which is helping kids to think about their own thinking. And I have them to do an annotated bibliography about reading articles that deal with the metacognitive process.
Which leads me to, there's a New York Best Time seller author, Tim Ferriss, who interviews the top 1,000 people in their particular field. Sorry, my dog saw a squirrel. Hey! And he basically talks about the art of asking questions. All right, I'm going to mute myself.
Okay. Yeah, the art of asking questions. Chapter 5 in your textbook is all about questioning, and that is using those higher order thinking skill questions. As we talked about a little bit last week, making sure that they are higher order thinking, that they require kids to go beyond just a rote answer, a quick answer that they can just read out of the book. You know, those are the kinds of things that we want people to be doing.
Right, like rewording a question rather than saying, what are your 3 favorite books? Something a little bit different angle. What would be your 3 books you recommend other people read, and why do you suggest that? You're going to get a completely different answer and more likely an elaborate response by changing the order of words in your question, or maybe just instead of responding in just a list or a yes or no, they'll actually have to give you some thought back into their response.
Right. Or you could, capitalizing on that idea, Stephen, you could ask them to, what are the similarities and differences between the main characters in those 3 books? So there are all kinds of things that you can do with that to have kids think about and think about it and come up with an answer that they can't find in the book. When I took U.S. history in high school, of course, that was when dinosaurs roamed, but the guy that I had for U.S. history was notorious in that when you got a textbook, if that person who had that textbook the year before had done his work, all you had to do was to pick up the book, and everything that he was going to talk about in class was underlined. He just sat at his desk and told you, underline this paragraph, or underline this sentence, underline this sentence. And then he took his test directly from those statements. So it was all just tremendously low-level thinking. No taxing the brain of kids at all in any way. So there are all kinds of ways of having kids to think, even at the youngest levels. Okay, any comments about the other instructional strategies that he mentions here? I think we've talked about most of these. All right. I hope this doesn't destroy everything. There we go. For this week, you are looking at your unit overview. And I wanted to just call that up and just remind you what that is. When you're doing You know, we talk about planning. We talk about the yearly plan. What are the topics that I'm going to cover? Then we talk about breaking it down into units. And so this is kind of the idea of I'm doing a unit. And what is the course that I'm doing this in, if it's American history or if it's health and PE 1, whatever it is. What is the unit about? That's your unit summary. Are there any interdisciplinary connections with other content disciplines? What are you expecting kids to be able to do as a part of this? And this should be the standards from the Foundations or the North Carolina Standard Course of Study. And what are the objectives for this unit? It might be a unit that's going to take 5 days. It might take a month. It depends on how you structure your units. Then what are the prerequisite skills that I expect kids to know or that they will need to know prior to coming into this? And we've done some of this kind of before. And then how am I going to evaluate and assess their learning? So that's just the unit overview for hopefully these 4 lesson plans that you're doing. As I said before, I have been requiring 8 lesson plans, but you all did so well on your first one. I'm just going to say do 4. You've already done 1. So for this week, you're going to put together your unit plan, and that is your using that template that I just did, that I just gave you. Oh, back up. And then you're going to have your 3 lesson plans, 2, 3, and 4. Hopefully they'll be a part of that unit. And those are the assignments for this week. Now for next week, there will be a final exam. And as I said, most of your final will come from the questions and things that you have done in your test items that I'm getting from up here. You know the main topics that we've talked about and that we focused on. Those will be the focus of the exam. Also for next week, you will do the assessment plan that correlates to the 3 lesson plans that you're doing here. So for this week, you're doing the unit overview and the 3 lesson plans. And then for next week, you're doing the 3 assessment plans that go with those lesson plans. And next week also, you will have an exam. It will probably not be all essay, but a major or a good part of it will be essay. I think you all do better from what I've observed so far in kind of the essay context, because you did very well on that midterm, most of you. Those of you particularly who watched the time and got through that. So any questions about this week or next now? We will meet briefly next week. We probably won't be here the whole hour, but we will meet just in case there are questions.
Dr. Benson, this is Evelyn. The lesson plans, with it being 3 different lesson plans, you want them all together, like in one document? You know what I mean? Like just kind of.
Yeah, just one line. Yeah, just do them as a continuous Word document.
Continuous, okay.
Will this final exam be timed?
It will be, but I will try to be generous with the time, okay?
Thank you.
Evelyn, was that you? I mean, Ethel?
Yes.
Yeah, because you had, okay, I know. All right, any other questions? I know you all are not asking questions because you want to get out early. And it's working because I'm going to end the meeting. Any other questions? Last call.
No, sir.
No.
All right, thank you all. I'll see you next week briefly, okay?
Thank you. Have a good night.
Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Night.
Good night.